You are Locked On Bears, your daily Chicago Bears podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
We don't want to get too far ahead of ourselves here because the Bears haven't made any formal changes just yet, but I think we're approaching that time now where it's important to start at least taking a look around at what some of the head coaching options could be if and when your Chicago Bears make a change at the top of the organization. This is Locked On Bears, and I'm your host, Lorin Cox. I'm an analyst for Pro Football Focus, and I'm here to bring you your daily, in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. You can follow me on Twitter at CoxSports1. You can follow the podcast on Twitter at Locked On Bears. You can like Locked On Bears on Facebook. Join the Locked On Bears Facebook group for even more Bears talk. And make sure you hit that subscribe button on the Locked On Bears YouTube channel to keep up with all of our video podcasts as well. Today's episode is brought to you by Stance Apparel. Stance believes the perfect fit matters more than fitting in. Enjoy the color and comfort of a life less ordinary with Stance. Thanks for making Locked On Bears your first listen today and every single day. We're here for you 5 days a week. And on the show today, we're going to start browsing. We're more big picture look at okay, here's the general candidate pool of head coaches that every team who's looking for a head coach this offseason will generally be working from. And I think we're going to split them up into a couple of different categories to make this a little bit easier to follow along. So we're going to start with the group that I'll call rising coordinators. Guys who have never been NFL head coaches before, but are kind of on the up and up and in these circles and in these discussions as guys that are likely to get interviews, and maybe some of the, I don't know if the hot names, because there's quite a few of them and not all of them are going to get all the interviews, but some of the more just new first-time head coach candidates here that could be a nice fresh start for an organization like the Bears. Then we're going to look at the guys that I think we'll call sort of second chance head coaches, guys who have been head coaches before and didn't necessarily work out super well in their first stop, now have been playing the coordinator game a little bit and might be ready for that second chance back in that head coaching role. And then we'll wrap up with a group of guys that maybe some are going to be more hopeful pipe dreams than others, but it's running it back with guys who have had success before, guys who have been NFL head coaches who aren't coordinators right now, but guys who have had a lot of success in this league that might be interesting to bring into Chicago, even if some maybe are more likely than others. But let's start with some of the rising coordinators, because these are the names that are a little bit more the newer names, the fresher names, that they tend to be the sexier candidates, as opposed to the idea of a retread, someone who's he has some of that stink on him from his last stop, or he's been through that before, and we want something new and fresh. And there's a fairly long list of them, and so we don't have time to deep dive on every single candidate, and that's not the point. Today's podcast is just sort of brief kind of overview on here's a lot of the top names that are going to be on the radar. Let's start with Buffalo Bills offensive coordinator Brian Daboll. He kind of helped mold Josh Allen into what Josh Allen is at this stage of his career. And, we've seen the Bills offense do a lot of really great things. I mean, they've been able to sort of elevate to this higher level of, getting it as one of the top offenses in the NFL over the last couple of seasons. But we have seen now this year, Bills fans getting some frustration with Brian Daboll. And it's a question of, okay, is he this magic quarterback whisperer who figured out Josh Allen and now has been able to sort of, bring that expertise to Chicago and Justin Fields, or did Josh Allen have it in him? And, they put good wide receivers around him and pretty good defense with him and a good supporting cast. How much of that is the offensive coordinator and how much of that is the players there? And just had, Daboll, he's been an offensive coordinator in the NFL in previous stops and had mixed results as well. So it's just sort of, there's some questions there, but certainly a lot to like about Brian Daboll. I think perhaps the most shiny new hot name rising up and comer of the whole list is going to be Dallas Cowboys offensive coordinator Kellen Moore. He's been their coordinator just for 2 years, and he's been coaching in the NFL for 3. I mean, he was a quarterback out of Boise State. You might remember, left-hander, played for the Lions for a while. He retired in 2017, 5 years ago. When John Fox was the Bears head coach, Moore retired as a player from the NFL. So very raw. He's 33, 34 years old entering this offseason. Very young, very raw, but one of these fast risers, had a lot of success and been very innovative for that Dallas Cowboys offense. But again, inexperience is definitely the big negative there. How about Tampa Bay Buccaneers offensive coordinator Byron Leftwich? Won the Super Bowl last year, but with Tom Brady, he's been a coach, I think, for 5 or so years, another recently retired quarterback, but, didn't do amazing with Jameis Winston and Ryan Fitzpatrick the year before Tom Brady came in. He seems to be a good leader, and Bruce Arians respects the heck out of him and wants him to be a head coach someday, but is it a little bit too early with him? How much did he learn a lot from Brady? Is that going to help, or is he getting elevated a little bit by Tom Brady and maybe inflated a little bit more? That one's going to be hard to kind of pin down. Another one is hard to pin down. Packers offensive coordinator Nathaniel Hackett. How much credit do you give him for what Green Bay's been doing under LaFleur? They got Aaron Rodgers. Hackett's been an offensive coordinator before with the Jaguars and the Bills and had pretty decent success, all things considered, but not lighting the league on fire either. Like, he's never been an elite offense before Green Bay, but he's not just a LaFleur only type, underling. So he's got some of his own perspective in there that could make him a head coaching candidate. But again, never been sort of the over-the-top wow type of candidate. Greg Roman from the Ravens, their offensive coordinator, has put together some of those wow seasons as an offensive coordinator with Lamar Jackson coaching him up to be the MVP, with Colin Kaepernick and the 49ers. He's worked with mobile quarterbacks and had a lot of success with them as an offensive coordinator. He's also had some real questionable moments in between there, which is why he hasn't been able to convert those top 5 offensive seasons into a head coaching job just yet. Even earlier this season's the Dolphins, they blitzed the heck out of the Ravens and they had no adjustments. Like the offense failed to adjust. So there's always like these little question marks around Greg Roman in between some really, really strong seasons of success. Or how about their defensive coordinator, Don Martindale? They were top 5 defense like 2018, 2019, 2020, dropping off a little bit down more this year, but one of these, aggressive blitzing defensive coordinators, kind of all or nothing. And there's some big boom or bust that carries with that. But he's been, in that defensive system for a while and built some fairly consistent groups. And then one other name I want to throw in here really quickly. He's not really a rising coordinator, but every year we're always going to have the Dave Toub conversation. Chiefs special teams coordinator, longtime Chicago Bears special teams coordinator. Is this the time he gets his head coaching job? I'm guessing not. The NFL doesn't. It's just a weird flip of the way the NFL system has worked. There's enough of these other candidates, but every year I feel more, or every time we go through this with a Bears head coach opening, I feel more and more ready for Dave Toub to be the Chicago Bears head coach. It's just, the connections are there, the familiarity with the city, and somebody's eventually got to take a chance on him. And why not the Bears? Why not now? So those are kind of the never been a head coach before, but the names that are going to be in a lot of those conversations as the rising guys that all have their flaws. There's no perfect date ever in the search. But the more experienced head coach, they definitely carry some negative history with them as well. We'll go through some of the head coaches that have been head coaches before, might be ready for a second chance, and why it might be worth taking another chance on a guy who has gone through it before. Next on Locked On Bears. We are just a few months away from Super Bowl 56 at SoFi Stadium in Los Angeles, and our friends at On Location are the only place to score a once-in-a-lifetime Super Bowl ticket and experience package, because On Location is the official hospitality partner of the NFL. This is a legit organization, a legit partnership. This is not some ticket scalper getting you into the Super Bowl on some kind of back door under the table type deal. This is you selecting your exact seats at the big game in Los Angeles and then choosing from a bunch of different elite experiences to pair with it. You can get in an exclusive pregame celebration with NFL legends, like former NFL players, Hall of Fame type guys, to enjoy that sort of pregame Super Bowl atmosphere with. They, of course, have 5-star hotels in Los Angeles to choose from, and food by the great Wolfgang Puck. You can't beat this type of a luxury experience package all surrounding the big Super Bowl. It's a football lover's dream. So visit onlocationexp.com/SB56 for more information, or you can search the words Super Bowl On Location. The website, onlocationexp.com/SB56, or search Super Bowl On Location. Excuse me. Today's podcast also brought to you by our friends at Stance Apparel. They make some really, really comfortable clothing, socks, underwear, even some shirts. And now they've got some athletic wear coming out now. But not only does it feel good, it looks good too. It's not plain. It's not boring. They let you really sort of express your style a bit more through your clothing and in some ways that you just can't really quite find anywhere else. So don't worry about the same old boring socks underwear that you're always sort of used to wearing. Stance is changing that by offering not only comfort, but color and creativity like no other. They've got some great partnerships for licensing standpoints. You can get Wu-Tang Clan gear, Marvel, DC, Star Wars, The Office, Harry Potter, even some sports. They got some baseball, some basketball, some soccer in there. They're slowly branching out to more and more of those opportunities as well. And so I just don't think you can find another brand on the market that, again, matches style and comfort the way that Stance does. Because Stance believes that the perfect fit matters more than just fitting in, that those who feel good do good. So go see for yourself. Register for an account at stance.com and get 15% off your first purchase. You just have to enter in our promo code LOCKED ON at checkout to apply. Enjoy the color and comfort of a life less ordinary with Stance. The idea of hiring a head coach who's been a head coach before and failed as a head coach is never one that gets the fan base super fired up. And the names always sort of then come with this stench, with this, and almost sort of stigma is maybe not quite the right word, but like it comes with baggage, right? It's like, oh yeah, I remember when he was head coach there and they weren't very good. And that's sort of like what you remember because they were the head coaches. But I do think it's easy to overlook the times when giving a head coach a second chance with a new team has worked out very well. And not that these aren't exceptions and so versus the rule. There are plenty of times you give a head coach a second head coaching chance. See Lovie Smith in Tampa Bay, for example, where it doesn't work out. And right, so it's not a bona fide foolproof strategy. But you look around the NFL. Bill Belichick is obviously poster boy for this, but that's not replicable. But Bruce Arians going to Tampa Bay after failing in Arizona. Pete Carroll, which I'm too young to remember. Like when I was researching this podcast, I was like, wait, Pete Carroll was the head coach of the Patriots? Like I'll admit, I did not realize Pete Carroll was an NFL head coach before coming to the Seattle Seahawks. That was totally like way over my head and before that was when I was a wee lad and partially before I was born. So, but Pete Carroll, second chance as a head coach, goes Super Bowl. Andy Reid, pretty key example of this, although it's easy to say, well, he went to the Super Bowl in Philadelphia, so it shouldn't have been that surprising that he could do it again in Kansas City. But regardless, right, there's this trend. Even, Mike McCarthy right now in Dallas, mixed results, but still winning some games. They're in the playoff push and all that. And Ron Rivera, Carolina now to Washington. Again, Washington's not going to the Super Bowl right now, but it's still early and they're having success. And there's evidence that like coaches that are able to sort of get that second chance have done some things. Now, most of them were fairly successful in their first runs and then kind of had things fall apart towards the end for whatever reason. But some of these candidates have had some varying degrees of that as well. I think that there's really four main ones that jump out. And I was doing my best to kind of comb through NFL coaching staff stuff, make sure there weren't any main others. And I apologize if there's a name that I missed, but the main four that I came up with as far as current coordinators who have been head coaches before that maybe have earned some consideration here, right? So like if there might be some other guys who were bad head coaches and have been bad coordinators that I'm not including here, but guys that like they've done well enough in their coordinating jobs now to where maybe they deserve at least consideration for another head coaching job to see what they've learned from being a head coach the first time, going back to the coordinator game, adding that perspective and feeling like, you know what, if I could just try it a second time, I would do this differently. I would do that differently. And if I had Justin Fields instead of the last quarterback I had, maybe I could really do something special. So we'll start with Leslie Frazier from the Buffalo Bills, coaching some very good Bills defenses. I mean, they've been legit, and they've been legit for a handful of years now. And he's got a lot of experience as a coach. He was also the defensive coordinator with the Buccaneers before Bruce Arians, and it was not great defenses. That was actually under Lovie Smith with the Buccaneers there, but there have been some connections there. And he was, of course, the head coach of the Minnesota Vikings. And we kind of remember those Vikings teams not being great, their defenses not being phenomenal either, but he did work his way up that organization and has a lot of that NFL experience. And it's with all these guys, like I'm not trying to particularly like sell you on any of them individually. And I'm not particularly trying to like poo-poo any of them individually, although I think you kind of tell through some of the names I've gone to, I might have some slight leanings one way or another on some of these guys, but certainly I think that there's something there to a guy like Leslie Frazier, for example, getting another chance. I have more more hesitancy about Josh McDaniels from the Patriots. He's always going to be in these conversations until he either takes over for Bill Belichick or takes another head coaching job somewhere else. He's run some really great offenses in New England. Like there's no doubt about it. And he's done a really good job with Mac Jones this season. There's no questioning that. Now, there is questioning when he sort of accepted the Colts job and then bailed last year, and whether he's, reliable, mature, flaky in terms of head coaching and leadership, because we all remember then Denver with Jay Cutler pushing him out, and then it really fell apart there with Tebow, and just kind of undisciplined, and just kind of, it was a mess, right? Josh McDaniels' tenure in Denver was a mess, and it left a pretty big kind of cloud over him as a coach, and why he has had to do so much image rehabilitation with the New England Patriots. And big question is even does he even want to leave the Patriots, right? I mean, that's kind of been the big one, where it's like, maybe is Justin Fields enough to pull him out? Maybe, but other potentially nice quarterback situations have not been enough to pull him out in the past. So he's in this conversation at all times, but not one that I think I'm in love with, and also not one that seems very likely compared to the others. The one I'm almost most interested out of this group, I think, at least this group of the second chance head coaches, is Raheem Morris. He's currently the defensive coordinator of the Los Angeles Rams. He was the head coach for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers after Lovie Smith, before Lovie Smith. He replaced John Gruden in Tampa Bay, and I think Lovie replaced Raheem Morris, if my timeline is correct. I'm not an expert on the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, right? But what makes Raheem Morris interesting is, yes, he's coaching a really good Rams defense right now. This is his only season coaching the Rams defense. Before that, he was with the Atlanta Falcons as their passing game coordinator and wide receivers coach, and coached the offense. He's one of the few coaches that you see in the NFL coaching both sides of the ball in significant positions, right? It's not just he was an offensive assistant, he was, quality control coach on offense, and then made the jump over to the defense. Raheem Morris was legitimately a top assistant on both sides of the ball. He was passing game coordinator and assistant head coach and wide receivers coach for the Falcons, then jumped to be their defensive coordinator and was their interim head coach. He was the Buccaneers head coach from 2009 to 2011 and coached their DBs before that, and now the Rams defensive coordinator. So I like the idea of hiring a head coach who legitimately knows both sides of the ball and has coached both sides of the ball at a high level in the NFL. I don't love what he did as a head coach. I don't know that his time as the Falcons offense was pretty good with Matt Ryan. They went to the Super Bowl and obviously choked against the Patriots, but he was involved in that. He did go to the Super Bowl with the Buccaneers under Gruden early on before he came back and took over as a head coach. But he's done a good job with this Rams defense, but kind of inherited a good Rams defense. So none of his coordinating and head coaching spots have really necessarily wowed me. I just really like that coached both sides of the ball perspective. And maybe that's artificially inflated and I'm giving him too much credit for that, but it's intriguing. How about that? We'll file that under intriguing candidate, Raheem Morris. Last one of these second chance head coaches, Todd Bowles, Buccaneers defensive coordinator. Solid defenses in Tampa Bay, solid defenses when he was defensive coordinator of the Cardinals. Head coaching of the New York Jets, not so great. And, their defenses were okay, but and they didn't really have quarterbacks. So do you give him some benefit of the doubt there? Yeah, but they lost a lot of football games, and it was not a great experience for him. And it strikes me that when he's been a really good coordinator a couple times and a bad head coach in between, is he one of these guys that's just, he's a good coordinator and not a good head coach? I mean, you could say the same thing about McDaniels and Morris and Frazier. All these guys have those questions, but especially with defensive coordinators that are this good as a defensive coordinator a couple times and bad as a head coach in between, I don't know. Maybe again, that's unfair projecting, but I just have that fear with Todd Bowles and Josh McDaniels. Whereas I don't know, do I give him credit for being a good coordinator when I'm also being critical of those other guys for not being good enough coordinators? Maybe that's not fair on both sides. That's why it's so hard to judge whether a coach is going to be a good head coach as opposed to whether or not they're just, a quality coordinator candidate. But that's why we're just kind of going bigger picture overview here. We'll do more in-depth dives on these guys as we get into the offseason, really, and as the Bears head coaching position does sometime open up. But I do want to get to some of the more exciting names, the bigger names, the ones that might be a little bit harder to get and might be a little bit more of a long shot, but the guys that have really been successful, and maybe you want them to bring that success to Chicago. We'll go through some of the big names, including the one at Michigan, next on Locked On Bears. This holiday season, grab the protein bar that tastes like a candy bar, but doesn't have the sugar and unnecessary calories and fat that you get from a regular candy bar. They are Built Bars, the world's best tasting protein bars. And I'm not even kidding you. Before I sat down to record this podcast, I just placed a reorder. They have gingerbread flavored Built Bars out right now. So I got a 12 pack of those plus a 6-pack of coconut brownie chunk. Got to restock for the holiday season. And I almost pulled the trigger on the eggnog Built Bars, but opted for the gingerbread instead. Really curious to try both. They both sound delicious. I've not had a flavor of Built Bar that isn't delicious. They really do all taste like candy bars. They're all 100% covered in real chocolate. They're soft. They're easy to chew. But most important part, low sugar, low calories, high fiber, and high protein. You can't find a protein bar product on the market anything like this. Go over to built.com and enter in our promo code LOCKED15, and you're going to get 15% off your next order. I just used the promo code myself, LOCKED15, for 15% off at built.com. Let's have some fun with some head coach candidates here. Some more realistic than others. And this category of guys who have been very, very successful. And it would be cool to see that success in Chicago. There's one guy who doesn't really fit into a category that I'll throw in at the end here. You might be able to figure out when it's all said and done that he hasn't been an NFL guy, but has had that success. And so I didn't really have a good home for him, but he's not a coordinator. Anyway, let's start with Jim Harbaugh, the hero of Michigan football right now, leading them to the playoffs. We'll see championship or not, but regardless, they beat Ohio State, big Michigan season. Everyone loves him again after a lot of really bad seasons in Michigan where a lot of Wolverines fans, they were ready to fire him. And now Wolverines fans will tell me, they've been in my Twitter mentions, they'll say, hey, Jim Harbaugh's not leaving. Don't even get your hopes up. He's sticking around Michigan. Don't even think about it. He's here for the long haul. And probably, sure, absolutely. I'll give you that. I don't know if Jim Harbaugh's going to leave. I will say he was really, really successful in San Francisco. Went to 2 NFC championship games and a Super Bowl, then had 1 7-9 season and got fired. But he's got a 75% winning percentage. He lost 11 games or whatever, or 16. He didn't lose very many games, a couple dozen at most across his years as a head coach. I mean, incredibly successful in terms of the win-loss. Maybe burned some people out over that time, maybe a little too intense. Maybe some of that can be, he certainly has his flaws, right? He's not a perfect head coach candidate, or else he would have been hired away from Michigan years ago. But I've also heard from multiple people, I'm not like an insider sources reporting guy, but I've heard it from unrelated people multiple times that Jim Harbaugh's dream job is to be the head coach of the Chicago Bears. He was quarterback for the Chicago Bears, and that Michigan was a big one for him, but his dream job, he tells his friends and family supposedly that the Chicago Bears head coaching job would be his dream job. Is that enough to leave Michigan right now? Maybe not. Maybe he wants to ride that out, win a natty, keep the recruitment going, and it's fun to be the big man on campus, right? Totally. But that would be a fun one to see in Chicago. That's at the very least, it would be exciting, and that's for sure. One that is interesting for me that hasn't gotten talked about a lot, but Peter Bukowski from Locked On Packers brings it up with me every time we talk about it. Doug Peterson, the Philadelphia Eagles head coach, won the Super Bowl with Nick Foles, beat the Patriots, did the Philly special. An aggressive offensive head coach who had the success, right? I mean, you can't do better than what than what Doug Peterson did there. I Flirty and Slip, the coach we're going to get to next, but also Pete Carroll kind of flamed out in Philadelphia. There was a power struggle there with the GM, and he kind of said, "Screw it, I don't want to deal with this." But they were kind of mediocre. They had injuries to Wentz, and Foles kind of lost that magic, and so there were definitely really valid criticisms of Peterson that led up to his firing. And then also, I just wonder, is it too similar to Matt Nagy? Another Andy Reid offensive coordinator running the same offensive system. Would Bears management feel like that's fresh and new enough from a perception standpoint? Even though different coach, some different philosophies, same offensive system, but I mean, half the league's running Andy Reid stuff anyway at this point. So I don't know that the playbook itself is a big deal, but perception wise, I wonder if the team will want someone more removed from the Matt Nagy, Andy Reid tree than going right to Doug Peterson. Since I let it slip, a little bit more not surely going to be available, but would be fun if they were. Pete Carroll, Seattle Seahawks. They're losing games. They're talking about Russell Wilson leaving again. Those trade rumors have been strong, and maybe Seattle just says, screw it. We have to trade our quarterback anyway because he wants out. might as well, does Pete Carroll want to do a full rebuild with a brand new, a brand new quarterback in that whole situation in Seattle, or would he mutually part ways and come to Chicago? Would a trade be possible there? Because that's the same discussion we're going to have with Sean Payton, New Orleans Saints as well. Same kind of thing. Every year, it seems like there's rumors that Sean Payton could be traded from the Saints, that maybe they just want to go in a separate direction with Breeze retired. And now, they're doing the Winston Taysom Hill thing. And that maybe, I don't think there would be a mutual parting ways necessarily with Sean Payton. Whereas like the Seahawks could be more inclined to want to just maybe cut bait with Pete Carroll and start something new. There's been certainly plenty of frustrations with Pete Carroll by Seahawks fans, feeling like he's a little bit too old school, a little bit not open-minded or modern enough offensively, and relying too much on running the ball and not enough on letting Russ cook. There's that whole debate there. But he also has experience working with a mobile quarterback with some similar traits as Justin Fields. Russell was that there might be some natural tendencies there, and of course he's just tough winner. He's coached some very good defenses there as well. So there's a lot to like about Pete Carroll as a potential candidate. Sean Payton too. I mean, Super Bowl with Drew Brees. You wonder how much of that was Brees and how much of that was Sean Payton. But we saw last year and this year when Jameis Winston has been healthy, that Saints offense has worked, especially last season. I mean, they've had injuries to kind of all of them, whether it's Taysom Hill getting in there, Trevor Siemian was starting some games for them, and when Drew Brees got hurt in the past and they had other quarterbacks come in, they were able to do some things even without Brees. So plus give Sean Payton Justin Fields, that feels like a pretty good thing. Plus give him maybe a general manager that's not going to give him as much salary cap hell as the Saints have, although the Bears are getting there with Ryan Pace. But maybe you change out Ryan Pace, however that might work. It depends on what the draft pick compensation would be there. Because, I don't know, can you afford to give up another first round pick to go trade for Sean Payton when you already don't have your first round pick this year? Or, is a 2 and a 4 enough? I don't even know what the trade value would be for a head coach right now in that kind of situation going on with the Saints. But, Payton's a Super Bowl winner. Pete Carroll's Super Bowl winner. Doug Peterson, Super Bowl winner. Jim Harbaugh, Super Bowl finalist, plus a couple of championship games in San Francisco, and now a playoff finalist in college football. And one other name, I teased it at the beginning of the segment, Ryan Day, Ohio State. Lots of success at Ohio State. Coached Justin Fields at Ohio State, but inherited a really, really good Ohio State team. Jim Harbaugh himself kind of poked fun at it and said, sometimes when you're born on third base, you don't realize it takes a triple to get there. That's not his quote. I totally botched what his quote was, but sometimes you look down, you're on third base, and you didn't have to hit a triple to get there. Basically saying that Ryan Day just walked into a really good Ohio State team and hasn't actually earned any of that success. He spent a couple of seasons in the NFL as a quarterbacks coach, but that's the full extent of his NFL experience. And I'm a little bit off-put the way Matt Rule comes to Carolina and struggles from the college straight to the NFL head coaching job. Urban Meyer from Ohio State, off and then to Jacksonville. Obviously, that's been a disaster. It's hard to coaching in the NFL and head coaching in college are very, very different. And I would be more inclined with someone like Harbaugh, who has had success at the NFL level, as opposed to Day, who's maybe a little bit more of a wild card. Although, again, coaching Justin Fields in college is a very, very strong attribute, strong drive, strong factor in this potential head coach search. So that's sort of the big picture overview of what almost 20 different head coaching candidates for your Chicago Bears. Getting to know them, browsing a little bit. In the coming weeks, especially once we get in the offseason, if the head coaching change is made, we're going to do some deep dives on them individually. We'll talk to some of our Locked On Podcast Network friends about the Bills offensive coordinators. We'll talk to Joe Marino from Locked On Bills. We'll go through the Ravens coordinators, right? Get to kind of know them on a more local expert level with some people who have been following them a lot more closely than, say, I have or you have from the outside. So I hope you'll keep tuning into Locked On Bears throughout whatever is going to happen with the Bears head coach and throughout the rest of the season. We're not moving into full offseason mode. This is just a dabble. We'll still have crossover Thursday with Luke Braun breaking down the Vikings game on tomorrow's podcast. So I hope you're subscribed on wherever you listen to podcasts, or especially the Locked On Bears YouTube channel, keeping up with all of our video podcasts. Appreciate everyone who's been liking and commenting on those. It helps bring out the discussion just a little bit more. And between that and the Locked On Bears Facebook group, I think it makes it that much easier for you to bear down.